Imagine giving your heart to someone completely, only to watch them walk away and build a life with someone else. The pain, the betrayal, the questions that never seem to have answers. That's exactly what happened to her. She loved him with everything she had, believing they were meant to be. But one day, without warning, he chose someone else. And just like that, her world shattered. At first, she couldn't believe it. She thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he would come back. Maybe this was just a phase. But no. He was gone, married to another woman, moving forward as if their love had never existed. She spent nights wondering what she did wrong, replaying every conversation, every moment they had shared. Was she not enough? Was she too much? Did she miss the signs? The heartbreak was unbearable. She wanted to disappear, to escape from everything that reminded her of him. But life has a way of surprising us, even in our darkest moments. And instead of drowning in sorrow, she made a choice, one that would change her life forever. She refused to let his decision define her. Instead of sitting in silence, she found her voice. Instead of hiding away, she stepped into the world with a new purpose. Slowly, she rebuilt herself, one piece at a time. And as she did, something incredible happened. People started noticing her, not just for her beauty, but for the confidence she carried, the strength in her eyes, the way she walked like nothing could break her again. The woman who was once left behind had now become the woman everyone admired. Suddenly, doors that were once closed swung wide open. Opportunities, success, attention, things she never imagined for herself, were now within reach. She wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. And the man who once walked away, he was watching as the woman he left behind became the most desired, the most talked about, the one everyone wanted but no one could have. She stared at the message on her phone, her fingers frozen over the screen. His name. After all this time. A simple, "How have you been?" As if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't shattered her heart and walked away like she was nothing. For a moment, she felt the familiar ache, the ghost of an old wound. But then something else settled in a quiet strength. She wasn't the same woman he left behind. She had built herself up from the ruins of their past, turned pain into power, and now he was the one looking back. She locked her phone and tossed it onto the couch. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a response. Not now. Maybe not ever. But ignoring him didn't stop the memories from creeping in. She remembered the way he used to look at her, the promises he once made. The late-night calls, the whispered plans for the future. And then how quickly it all changed. How he drifted away, little by little, until one day he was gone, married to someone else, acting as if she had never been part of his life. She had spent months drowning in the weight of it all. Sleepless nights, unanswered questions, endless self-doubt. Until she decided she was done feeling sorry for herself. She had thrown herself into work, into passions she had once ignored. She focused on herself, her health, her dreams, her happiness. She traveled, met new people, discovered a version of herself that had been buried beneath the love she had once given so freely. And the world noticed. Her confidence, her resilience, it made people gravitate toward her. The woman who had been left behind had become the woman everyone wanted to know. And now, here he was, reaching out, as if he hadn't been the one to walk away. A part of her wanted to laugh. Another part of her wanted answers. But the strongest part, the part that had learned to live without him, it wanted nothing to do with his sudden regrets. But fate has a funny way of pulling people back into the past when they least expect it. Because as much as she tried to move forward, life was about to throw something at her that would change everything. She just didn't know it yet. The days passed, and she told herself she was done thinking about him. But every time her phone lit up, she found herself wondering if he would try again. He didn't. Just that one message, like a stone tossed into still water, disturbing the calm she had worked so hard to create. She should have been relieved. She should have been happy that he didn't try harder, that he wasn't forcing his way back into her life. But something about it lingered. Did he really just want to check in? Or was there more? She pushed the thoughts away and focused on what truly mattered herself. Life was moving fast, faster than she ever imagined. Invitations to exclusive events, business opportunities, people wanting to work with her, talk to her, be around her. The same world that had once felt so small, after he left now, seemed endless with possibilities. One night, at a high-profile event, she stood in the center of a grand room, dressed in a gown that made heads turn. Conversations buzzed around her, flashes of cameras, murmurs of admiration. She had made it. She was finally at a place where she no longer needed validation from anyone, especially not from him. And then, as if the universe had other plans, she saw him. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had never belonged in this world, the world she had created after him. But there he was, standing at the edge of the crowd, watching her. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. His expression unreadable. Her heart did something she wished it wouldn't, but she didn't let it show. She turned away, pretending not to care. But inside, something shifted. What was he doing here? Had he planned this? Or was it just a cruel coincidence? As she tried to ignore his presence, a voice pulled her back to reality. "He's looking at you," someone whispered beside her. She forced a smile, brushing it off. "Doesn't matter." But it did. And the night was far from over. She could feel his presence even without looking. It was strange how some things never changed the way her body instinctively reacted. How a single glance from him could stir something she thought was long gone. But she wasn't that same woman anymore. She had built a new life, one where he was nothing more than a ghost from her past. She turned her attention back to the conversation in front of her, smiling at the people who actually mattered. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the weight of his gaze. It was relentless, burning through the layers of distance she had carefully placed between them. A part of her wanted to walk up to him, to ask him why he was here, what he wanted. Another part of her wanted to leave, to avoid whatever mess he was about to drag into her life. But neither happened. Instead, the night played out as if he weren't there at all, until she stepped outside. The cool air was a relief from the crowded room, the noise fading behind her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. But before she could gather her thoughts, she heard his voice. "You look different." She froze. She hadn't heard that voice in so long, and yet it still had the same effect. Slowly, she turned around, meeting his eyes. He stood a few steps away, hands in his pockets, looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "I am different," she said, her voice calm, steady. He let out a quiet breath, almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "I can see that." Silence settled between them, the kind that held too much weight, too many things left unsaid. She should have walked away. She had nothing to say to him, but she didn't move. Not yet. "Why are you here?" she finally asked. For a moment, he hesitated. "Then, I needed to see you." She let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "Why?" "To see if I was still broken, if I was still waiting for you." His jaw tightened. "No, I made a mistake." Her heart clenched, but she didn't let it show. She had waited too long to hear those words, back when they might have meant something. But now they were just empty. "That's not my problem," she said, turning to leave. But his voice stopped her. "It was never about you not being enough." She froze again, his words hitting a place she had buried deep. Slowly, she turned back, searching his face. There was something there, regret, maybe even pain. But it didn't change anything. "It doesn't matter," she said, softer this time. "You made your choice, and I made mine." He took a step closer, and for a second, she thought he might say something that would change everything. But he didn't. He just stood there, watching her the way he should have before it was too late. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the cold. But even as she disappeared into the night, she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. She told herself that was the end of it, that she had walked away for the last time. But the universe had other plans. Days passed, then weeks, and just as she thought she had escaped the past, it found its way back to her. First, it was the messages, short, hesitant, like he wasn't sure if she would even read them. Then, it was the unexpected encounters, places he had no reason to be. Places she had built for herself, far from the ruins of what they once had. It wasn't coincidence. She knew that. He was trying to break through the wall she had put up, trying to make her see something she didn't want to see. One evening, she arrived at a private event, an exclusive gathering filled with people who had become part of her world. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, another step forward in the life she had fought so hard to create. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt it. That familiar presence. She scanned the room, and there he was. Standing near the back, watching her like he always did, like he was waiting for something. Her pulse quickened, but she refused to acknowledge him. She moved through the crowd laughing, smiling, acting as if he was nothing more than a stranger in the room. But every step she took, she felt his eyes on her. Then, just as she thought she had made it through the night without a confrontation, she turned a corner and found him standing there. Close. Too close. "You have to stop," she said, before he could speak. His gaze searched hers. "Tell me you don't feel anything, and I will." She hated him for that. For knowing exactly what to say, for pulling at the one part of her that she had fought so hard to bury. "I don't," she said. A lie. A necessary one. His jaw tensed. "I never wanted to hurt you." She let out a breathless laugh. "But you did. And now, you don't get to rewrite the past just because you regret it." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Just talk to me," he said, voice low, desperate. She shook her head. "You made your choice. And I made mine." She turned to leave, but then he said something that stopped her cold. "There's something you don't know." She hesitated, but she didn't turn around. "I didn't marry her because I loved her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to keep walking. She didn't want to hear it. Didn't want to know. Because if she did, she wasn't sure she would be strong enough to walk away again. But the past wasn't done with her yet. And the truth was coming whether she was ready or not. She barely made it through the rest of the night. His words echoed in her mind, circling like a storm she couldn't escape. "I didn't marry her because I loved her." She wanted to believe it didn't matter. That no explanation could change what had already been done. But deep down, she knew those words had opened a door she had tried so hard to keep locked. For days, she convinced herself not to care. She threw herself into work, surrounded herself with people who reminded her of who she had become. But no matter how busy she kept herself, the past had already found a crack in her armor. Then one evening she received an invitation. A private dinner, an event she hadn't planned to attend until she saw his name on the guest list. She told herself she was going for business, that he was irrelevant. But the moment she stepped into the venue, she knew she had been lying to herself. The room was filled with familiar faces, laughter, the clinking of glasses. But she barely noticed any of it. Because there he was, across the room, his eyes finding hers almost instantly. This time, he didn't wait. He walked toward her with purpose, determination. And for some reason, she didn't move. "Come with me," he said, voice quiet but firm. She should have said no. She should have turned and walked the other way. But instead, she let him lead her to a quieter corner of the venue, away from the eyes and whispers. He hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. Then, finally, he said it. "I had no choice." She narrowed her eyes. There's always a choice. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Not this time. She crossed her arms. Then explain it to me. Make me understand why you threw everything away. He looked at her, searching her face. It was never about not loving you, he said. It was about protecting you. A chill ran down her spine. Protecting me from what? He hesitated. And in that moment, she knew whatever he was about to say was bigger than just the two of them. I need you to trust me, he said. She let out a short, bitter laugh. Trust you? After everything? He took a step closer. I never wanted to leave. I never wanted to hurt you. But I had to. Because if I didn't, he stopped himself, his jaw tightening. Her heart pounded. If you didn't, what? He swallowed hard. You would been in danger. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. This was something else. Something she had never seen coming. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure she was ready for the truth. She felt the room closing in around her, his words replaying in her mind. You would been in danger. It didn't make sense. How could walking away, marrying someone else, have anything to do with protecting her? She forced herself to hold his gaze. You're lying. I'm not, he said, his voice steady. I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't. It wasn't safe. She shook her head, anger and confusion battling inside her. Safe from what? From who? He hesitated. And then, finally, he said it. Her family. The words sent a shiver through her. His wife. The woman he chose. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. So you're telling me you married her because you were scared of her family? His jaw clenched. Not scared. Trapped. She didn't want to believe him, but something about the way he said it, the way his entire body tensed, made her pause. I was given a choice, he continued. Marry her, or you suffer the consequences. She felt her pulse quicken. What consequences? His eyes darkened. They were going to destroy you. Your reputation, your career, everything you had worked for. And it wouldn't have stopped there. Her breath caught. That's insane. It's the truth, he said. They knew I loved you. They knew you were my weakness. And they were going to use it against me. She stared at him, her heart pounding. It sounded impossible, like something out of a movie. And yet, deep down, a part of her knew he wasn't lying. She had always known his wife came from wealth, power, influence. But she had never imagined it extended this far. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to scream at him for not fighting harder, for not trusting her enough to face it together. But as she looked at him now, she saw something she hadn't before. Regret, pain, and something else, something even heavier. There's more, isn't there? She asked quietly. He exhaled, nodding. She's gone. Her stomach twisted. Gone? They found out I reached out to you, he said. They think I betrayed them. And now she's missing. A cold wave of fear ran through her. This isn't over, he continued. And if they find out I've told you any of this. The lights flickered. A sudden noise from the other room made them both freeze. And in that moment, she knew. They weren't alone. The air in the room felt different, heavier. She could feel her pulse racing, the tension thick between them. His eyes darted toward the doorway, his body stiffening like he was bracing for something. She wasn't sure if it was paranoia or instinct, but she knew one thing: this wasn't just about the past anymore. A sudden sound, faint but deliberate, came from outside the room. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. Were they being watched? Had someone followed them here? She opened her mouth to speak, but he shook his head, his eyes warning her to stay silent. He took a slow step toward the door, listening. She held her breath, gripping the edge of the table behind her. The footsteps faded. Then, nothing. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "We need to get out of here." She hesitated, her heart still pounding. "You think someone's after you?" His jaw clenched. "I know they are." 1,000 questions swirled in her mind, but now wasn't the time. He grabbed her wrist, not forcefully, but with urgency. She let him lead her out of the room, her senses on high alert as they stepped into the hallway. The event was still in full swing, laughter and conversation filling the space. No one else seemed to notice anything unusual, but she knew better. As they reached the exit, she couldn't stop herself from looking over her shoulder. And that's when she saw them. A man in a dark suit standing near the bar, his eyes locked on her. He wasn't drinking, wasn't speaking to anyone, just watching. She turned away quickly, her breath unsteady. "Someone's watching us," she whispered. He didn't react, didn't turn to look. Instead, he kept walking, his grip on her wrist tightening slightly. "Keep moving." They stepped outside, the night air cool against her skin. He led her toward a car parked just down the street. As soon as they got inside, he locked the doors, his hands gripping the wheel like he was ready to drive through a storm. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "What now?" He didn't answer right away. He stared ahead, his mind clearly racing. Then, finally, he said, "I have to fix this." She frowned. "Fix what? What does that even mean?" He turned to her, his expression raw. "Everything." She wanted to push for more, to demand answers, but she could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just trying to protect himself. He was protecting her. And for the first time, she realized just how deep this went. They drove in silence for a while, the city lights flashing past them. She wasn't sure where they were going, but she didn't ask. She wasn't even sure if she wanted to know. All she knew was that nothing about this was over yet. Finally, after what felt like hours, he pulled into a quiet street. An old building stood ahead, dark and empty. He turned off the engine, exhaling heavily. "This is where it started," he said. She looked at him, confused. "What?" He turned to face her fully. "The reason I left. The reason I had no choice." She followed his gaze to the building. It looked abandoned, forgotten. But something about it made her shiver. And then, just as she was about to speak, a movement in the shadows caught her eye. Someone was waiting for them. A figure stepped forward, their face hidden beneath the glow of a street lamp. And then, finally, she understood. This wasn't just about the past. This wasn't just about heartbreak. This was something much bigger. And she was right in the middle of it. She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Tell me everything." And this time, he did. It wasn't just an arranged marriage. It wasn't just family pressure. It was a deal one he had made to keep her safe. She listened, each word cutting deeper than the last. She wanted to be angry, wanted to scream at him for not telling her sooner. But as she sat there, hearing the truth, she realized something. If he hadn't walked away, she might not be here at all. The weight of it all pressed down on her, but there was no time to process. Because the moment he finished speaking, the figure outside moved closer. And in that moment she knew. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of a different kind of fight. She had spent so long thinking she had moved on, that she had built a life beyond him. But now she realized the truth. She wasn't running from him. She was running from a story she hadn't even known she was a part of. And now there was no turning back. Because the past had finally caught up to her. And this time, she wasn't walking away.